Welcome back to Mr. Nightgrim. Today, we descend into 5 true Alaskan horror stories, with endings that don't just chill the spine, they never quite let go. These aren't tales that wrap up neatly, they leave something behind. Out here, in Alaska's endless silence, not every voice belongs to the living. Some sing like children hidden in a blizzard, their bare footprints leading toward tunnels of ice. Others echo through lighthouses long abandoned, repeating your own name back to you as though they've been waiting. And sometimes, a storm doesn't move across the tundra at all. It waits like it knows you're coming. These aren't campfire tales. They're pieces of something darker, fragments pulled from the cold that refuses to give its secrets back. If you've lived through the unexplainable, tell us in the comments below. Maybe your story will be the one we bring to life next, with your name woven into the dark. And don't forget to subscribe. The silence is never empty. Now, let's go. It was the winter of 2008, the kind of season in western Alaska where the sun never seems to fully rise. The sky stayed a muted gray for most of the day, as though the land were permanently caught between night and morning. I was working as a seasonal surveyor for a small resource company, sent out to map permafrost changes along stretches of tundra that stretched farther than most people could imagine. Out there were no cabins, no road access, no power lines, just endless white plains broken only by the occasional scatter of stunted spruce trees, hunched as if trying to survive another brutal year. That morning, the cold felt like a physical presence pressing down on me. My snow machine vibrated beneath me as I cut across the flats, the engine's hum, the only sound against the sweeping emptiness. Then, without warning, it sputtered once, twice, and died. The machine stilled under me, like an animal collapsing mid-run. I yanked the starter cord again and again until my gloves were stiff with frost, but nothing. The storm came in fast, the sky folding into itself, until the horizon disappeared, swallowed in blowing white. Every direction looked the same: snow, ice, a sky that was more like a ceiling of slate than anything resembling light. My GPS blinked uncertainly, the signal struggling to lock. A creeping dread settled into me. The kind that doesn't come all at once but crawls slowly, whispering, "You're too far from help." I decided I couldn't stay with the dead machine. If I followed the shallow ridges, I thought I might orient myself back toward camp. It was supposed to be simple, a trek over the flats, maybe a mile or two. But the storm thickened and the wind blew sideways, scouring the skin of my face raw despite the balaclava. Snow stung like grit against my goggles, every gust whistling sharp enough to feel like voices. And then I realized it wasn't the wind. At first I thought I was imagining it, faint threads of sound winding through the storm. But the longer I stood, the clearer it became. Children, singing. Not one voice, several, thin, high-pitched, eerie in the way they carried on the wind. The sound prickled the back of my neck. I yanked my radio from my coat, fumbling with the dials. Static hissed, but the voices continued, drifting around me. I even switched it off, convinced the unit had gone haywire, but the voices stayed. The melody was strange, like an old hymn that had been fractured and rearranged. Slow, drawn-out notes tangled together, some verses overlapping and some fading, as if no one cared about rhythm. The words weren't set clear, just fragments: sleep now under, come away. The singing wasn't coming from behind me where camp lay. It wasn't faint like echoes. It was directly ahead, deeper into the storm. And I knew what lay in that direction. Nothing. 100 miles of tundra, ice, and silence. No villages, no schools, no children. My first thought was that it had to be hunters camped out with their families. Maybe someone with kids staying in a temporary shelter. I pushed on, telling myself that explanation as if saying it could make it true. Snow gusted around me, drifts sculpted into waves, ridges rising and falling until I lost all sense of scale. My headlamp beam cut through the gray, illuminating patches of ground, and that's when I saw them. Small impressions in the snow. I crouched low, brushing powder away. My breath plumed thickly, freezing against my scarf. The prints were tiny, narrow, bare feet pressed into the snow. My heart thudded unevenly. They were human, unmistakably so, but far too small, like those of children not older than 6 or 7. Worse, the toes were spread wide, and the impressions weren't sinking deep, as though the feet barely touched the surface. The air temperature was below 0. No child could be running barefoot across ice for more than minutes. The thought lodged sharp in my chest. My radio hissed again. This time it wasn't static. A child's laugh spilled through the speaker, high and shrill, even though I'd switched the unit off. My stomach turned to ice. I nearly dropped the radio into the drift. I spun in a full circle, snow crunching beneath my boots. For the briefest instant, I saw shapes low and darting, slipping behind a ridge ahead. I squinted, but the storm thickened again, erasing everything. Then the singing rose once more, louder now, urgent, as if the storm itself had taken their voices and was pushing them into my ears. My breath came harsh and fast. Logic told me to turn back, but something in that sound pulled me forward like a current. Against my better judgment, I followed the prints. They multiplied quickly. What began as 2 became 4, then 8, then a dozen, weaving over each other until the snowfield looked like a child's scrawled page. Some trailed off into nowhere, ending as abruptly as if the walker had vanished mid-step. My GPS flickered and spun, the numbers tumbling nonsense. The more I tried to fix a direction, the more disoriented I became. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out, only to see the screen glitching, coordinates scrambled. Then a chime, new voicemail. The caller ID made my throat close. It was from my own number. The phone chime sounded impossibly bright in all that gray. I thumbed the screen open with stiff fingers and pressed play. My own voice bled out of the tiny speaker, strained and ragged, the way a voice sounds after running too far in too little air. It sets so cold down here. Don't sets follow them. The wind seemed to hesitate, as if listening with me. For a few seconds I could hear nothing but my breath and the faint tick of ice crystals hitting my goggles. Then the world pressed in again, snow hissing sideways, fabric snapping, a thin choir of children lifting into a new verse I couldn't quite recognize. I put the phone away because I didn't know what else to do with it. It felt hot in my pocket, as if it had a fever. Ahead, a pale hump rose out of the drift. At first I took it for a wind-sculpted berm, but the closer I came, the more the shape refined itself. It wasn't snow, it was ice, polished by weather into a smooth arched lip like the beginning of a tunnel, a low mouth opening into the ground. From within, the light was different, a blue-white glow that came from nowhere, like the light you see under thick river ice when the sun is out. The singing was louder here, the notes sliding over each other in a way that made my jaw clench. The words were indistinct, but they didn't need to be words to mean something. They seemed to carry intention without language. Come, come. I tamped down the urge to call out. Instinct told me not to answer anything that knew how to speak in a storm. I angled my headlamp down. The beam slid over the entrance and spilled into the tunnel a few yards. Ice walls, glassy and striated, curved inward like the throat of some buried animal. Frost blossoms feathered the surface. My boot nudged something at the lip and I looked down. Footprints, small and bare, toes spread wide, vanishing into the blue. Between them, God help me, another set. Deep, rectangular tread marks I recognized from 100 mornings lacing up in the dark. My own boots. The prints ended at the threshold, like I had already gone inside and then ceased to exist. Something moved in the ice. My headlamp hiccuped, dimmed, and for a second I saw them not as shadows but as clear shapes. Children, or the outlines of children, pressed just beneath the surface as if behind a pane of frozen glass. Faces turned toward me. Their mouths formed syllables I couldn't hear, and their eyes were wrong, too shallow like the eyes of fish. Pale hands lay flat to the ice, fingers splayed as if waiting for mine to mirror them. And then, a single voice cut through the others, clean as a blade. It said my name, my full name, the one I hadn't heard since my mother used it when I was in trouble. It came from inside the tunnel, spoken in a pitch-perfect version of my mother's tone, though she'd been dead 3 winters already. My legs locked. I had the wild impression of the ice breathing, a slow expansion and contraction you felt more than saw. My phone buzzed again, a twitch against my hip. I didn't pull it out. I didn't want to know who was calling me from inside a place that felt like a throat. The choir swelled. The wind fell away, or maybe it was swallowed by the sound. Either way, the storm's voice wasn't the dominant voice anymore. I felt the pull of the tunnel like a tide. My body leaned without my permission, boots sliding an inch, too. Every part of me that wasn't animal terror argued that something in there wanted me alive and near, not to harm, not exactly to join, to harmonize. My headlamp flickered again and steadied. The beam shivered over the ice, caught for a heartbeat on a smear like a handprint from the inside, a print the exact size of mine, that broke whatever spell remained. I ran. I didn't decide to. The decision was already moving through me. My body just turned and went. Snow clawed at my shins. Drifts rose to mid-thigh. I stumbled, went down, got up with my gloves caked white. The singing didn't fade so much as shift. Now at my right, now at my left, as if the tunnel had two mouths, 3, 10, all open under the snow. Once, for a span of heartbeats, the voices cut off entirely, and I stopped, panting in a hollow that smelled like old fish and diesel from 100 miles away. Relief poured in, slick and warm. It lasted exactly long enough for me to breathe once. Then a single note sounded just behind my right ear, the kind of sound you feel in your teeth. A child's giggle followed, almost gleeful. I bolted, legs burning, hips grinding against the resistance of wind. Time became a trick. The gray light never shifted, and the cold invaded the seams of my gear despite every layer. When I finally saw the ripped orange of a wind flag snapping on a thin fiberglass pole, it looked unreal, as if someone had pasted it into the white world. The portable shelters of camp resolved out of the storm behind it, 2 framed tents, a generator sled, a stack of blue fuel drums half drifted. Smoke from the stovepipe wobbled sideways in the wind. The voices fell away all at once, as if a door had closed. Inside the nearest tent, heat hit me like a slap. The air smelled of damp wool, kerosene, sweat. My goggles fogged instantly. Someone swore and shouldered past to slam the flap shut behind me. "What the hell, man?" Kyle's voice, thick with Bethel vowels, broke first. He'd been out here longer than any of us and never raised his voice unless he meant it. We were about to spool a line and come haul your stupid... He stopped when he saw my face. "You stare late," Tanya said around a mouthful of cinnamon gum. Frost glittered on her lashes where she sit just come in, like 6 hours late. I stared at the clock, pinned above the workbench, 2017 in red LED. I tried to do the math and failed. My tongue felt too big for my mouth. I left before noon," I said, but it came out like a question. "You left at 11:30, Kyle said, softer now. "You don't set wander in at 5 like you went for a stroll." He tugged my hood back, rubbed my arms briskly through the parka to make sure I still felt it. "You warm enough? You with me?" I heard. I stopped. I didn't know how to say children without sounding broken. I recorded something. I fumbled my phone out, thumbed it awake. The screen blinked, flashed the low battery icon and died. I stared at it. I'd left with it nearly full. When I tried the radio to prove the laugh, it wouldn't even click. The indicator lights on both devices were the same dull nothing, as if whatever current they'd had been wrung out of them like water from a rag. I slept badly that night on the thin pad, every rise of wind outside reconfiguring into notes I tried not to recognize. In the morning the world was brighter, as if the storm had scoured everything and left it scoured clean. I didn't tell them about the tunnel. I told myself I was protecting my job, my credibility. The truth was simpler. Saying it out loud would make it fixed and real. We finished our contract. We hauled out weeks later when the weather gave us a window, drifting back along the packed snow trails toward the river and then to town, where the harbor smelled like a stew of salt, fish, rope, wet wood. I found a bar with windows facing the boats and nursed a beer. I didn't want. An old man took the stool beside me, the kind of old that looks light, as if the weight of him had been sanded down by wind. Worn wool watch cap, eyes the color of beach stones. A small raven pendant hung from a leather cord at his throat. "You look like you listened to something you shouldn't," he said, without preamble, as if we were picking up a conversation we'd been having for years. I blinked at him. Maybe the surprise showed. He smiled without showing teeth. "My grandmother used to warn me," he said, "about the children in the ice." I didn't speak. The word children cracked something in me. He went on anyway, voice slow and even, not selling anything. "Sometimes they come out singing in storms. They learn your name from the wind or from the living who speak too loudly near the ice. They call and call. If you answer, even in your heart, they ask you to come down and sing with them. They aren't cruel, but the glacier has wanted company a long time." I asked him if anyone ever came back. He took a long time answering. When he did, he didn't set a look at me. Weathers had bewis said songs that don't set belong to any throat. Voices on the radio when the radio is dead. Don't set answer when the storm sings your name. He tapped the raven to make sure I'd seen it, as if that were part of the instruction, and left me staring at the harbor glass where the light went white and flat in the afternoon. Years have stacked on top of that winter, like layers of ice. I've switched companies. I refuse contracts that require glacier work. I don't say why. I've made a small habit of checking my phone for voicemails. I don't remember leaving. None have ever appeared again. Though one time only, the phone buzzed in my pocket on a cloudless night and showed voicemail 1, and then blinked to black before I could touch it. Maybe it was a glitch. That's what I tell myself. When the aurora comes, and it does, often curling green and pale blue overhead like something alive, I sometimes stand outside until my ears ache. The snow carries sound too well up here. It carries the whine of far-off machinery, the occasional bark of a dog, the crack of ice shifting in some unseen creek. It also carries voices if you let it, high and thin and layered, like the edge of a hymn sung by people who never learned to match each other, braided into the breath of the wind so closely you might miss it unless you're already trying not to hear. Most nights I tell myself it's air dragging over broken spruce, or a generator a mile away finding a new rattle. Most nights the explanation holds. But every so often I catch the other thing, the echo sliding under the children like a darker current under bright water. My own voice, not recorded now but present, coming from a depth I can't measure. Begging, still the way it did on that storm day voicemail, do not follow, do not answer, do not come down. I listen very carefully to that echo. I go inside when the wind starts to harmonize. I keep my name hidden in my mouth like a coal. I don't dare breathe on. And if the storm ever learns a new verse, one that asks me to finish what I started at the tunnel's lip, I hope I remember the old man's advice before anything else. I hope I remember to be rude to whatever sings in the snow. Because some songs want you to sing along, and some songs want to make sure you never stop. The storm reached us like a set of blinds snapping shut across the sky. 1 minute the backcountry outside Fairbanks had that big open summer light that makes even muskeg look friendly. The next sheets of cold rain erased the tree line and turned the trail into a trembling ribbon of mud. Thunder cracked close enough to rattle my molars. The hikers I was guiding hustled to their tents, heads down, jackets hissing with runoff. I drew the short straw to check our gear caches along the old mining track, a 10-minute jog in good weather, a slog in this. By the time I was moving alone through the downpour, the temperature had dipped so fast the rain sharpened to sleet. The air smelled of wet spruce and old metal, like a toolbox left open in the weather. I trudged past a stand of black spruce and nearly walked into it, an abandoned gold camp, the kind you see in sepia photos at the visitor center. Half-collapsed cabins huddled low to the ground, roofs caved and furred with moss. Rusted boilers and winches lay half-swallowed by tundra, their rivets freckled green. Beside them, a line of black mouths gaped where shafts had once led underground. Most were ruined, entrances choked with rock and ice. With sleet ticking at my hood, and the trail already a river, the largest shack looked like salvation. Inside, the dark had weight. My headlamp cut a slow cone through the dust, picking out a wall of pickaxes stacked so neatly they could have been arranged yesterday. Odd because the roof above them was spidered with holes big enough to feed snow. The shack smelled like wet wood, cold iron, and the faint animal stink of something that had once sheltered there, long gone now. I rolled out my sleeping bag on the driest plank I could find, propped my pack against a beam, and told myself I'd wait out the worst of it. I'd been in Alaska long enough to know that sometimes the safest choice is to be boring. The silence pressed on my ears until I could hear my pulse. I checked my phone more out of habit than hope. 11:56 p.m., a single bar of service that didn't make sense this far out. I thumbed a text to Matt, another guide. Found cover. All good. The screen showed sent. No response. Fine. He was probably asleep. Earplugs in, like he always did when storms rolled through. Midnight arrived as a wait. Somewhere in the shack, the first sound broke it. A faint tink, tink, tink. I lay still, counting the intervals. Too regular for water, too sharp for a nail working loose. I crawled closer, pressed my ear to the planks. Clear as a bell, metal met stone. Not once, but by the dozen. Picks and hammers, a rhythm of work, measured and patient, as if a crew was deep below, driving a tunnel through rock. I pushed back, sat against the wall, made my brain say the reasonable things. Old shafts below, water traveling through gravel, sound traveling weird and cold. The historical society records I'd read before the season said the drifts here had collapsed in the 70s. No one had worked this ground since. I clipped my radio off my jacket to distract myself. Static. I turned the squelch dial with glove-thick fingers. Through the hiss, voices surfaced. Men's voices, low, gravelly, speaking in a cadence I almost recognized. Not English, not exactly. More like English words hammered into an older shape. A broken prayer, biblical and wrong at once. The skin on my forearms tightened. I put the radio down. The lantern sputtered even though I just trimmed the wick. Each time the hammering swelled, the flame pinched thin, as if the air itself were being pulled elsewhere. I stood to clear my head and stepped out into the sleet. The moment I crossed the threshold, the sound stopped. Silence smothered the world, just the whisper of sleet and the distant surge of wind and spruce. I took 3 breaths, 4, relief unfurled, small and cheap. When I stepped back inside, the hammering resumed, full as a heartbeat. The lantern guttered again. I swept my headlamp toward the old shaft line outside. The sleet had crusted a filmy skin of ice over the nearest collapse. Beneath it, the snow held a set of prints, not mine. Small, deep, moving in a straight line to the buried entry and vanishing under ice. The soles were smooth, studded with nail heads and a half-moon hobnails. Early 20th century. I knelt, breath fogging my beam, and the draft that hissed up through the collapsed shaft smelled like wet stone and something acrid, match heads ground into slate. I turned for the shack. My headlamp swung and caught a figure at the edge of the beam, tall, shoulders hunched. For a split second I thought it was Kyle, another guide, come to tell me I'd proven my point and to get back. The man raised his head. Where his eyes should have been were 2 black sockets that seemed to hold a faint green light, as if the aurora were moving underwater in there. The radio on my chest burst with static. Through it, a voice rasped, flattened by age and distance. My grandfather, gone 3 years. Get back inside, he said. They sips are still working. Donsets let them see you. The figure dissolved into the storm like it had been cut from it. I stumbled backward through the shack door and slammed it. The hammering below swelled, dust furring the air with every blow. My headlamp flickered once, twice, then steadied, and in that jitter I saw the pickaxes by the wall had shifted. No longer stacked, they leaned forward together, heads angled as if waiting for hands. Somewhere below, a man called a name I didn't catch, then another answered. Roll call. More names. The floor under me flexed a fraction, wood fibers creaking like teeth. I crouched by the cold stove, radio cold in my palm, and tried to decide if a sane person would run into a storm this bad, or stay and risk being counted with the night shift. The planks bowed minutely again. From under the floor a single pick struck so close I felt the knock in my heels. Another followed, and another, finding a rhythm that matched the tremor in my chest. The next strike landed so close, it rang through the nails holding the floor. A splinter leapt from between the boards. I lurched backward, and my phone lit my pocket with a dull glow. 1 missed call. The number on the screen was mine. I hesitated, then tapped the voicemail. Wind rattled the shack. The lantern thinned to a blue thread. Over the distant roar and the measured hammer of picks, my own voice bled through, breathless, too near the mic. The radio crackled as if answering. Voices rose beneath the floor, men calling roll one after another, the consonants clipped and old. Adler, here. Breen, here. Names I didn't know. A century out of date. Then woven late into the list, a new name, spoken in that same iron cadence. Mine. Hearing it said by those throats lifted every hair on my arms. It wasn't shouted, it was accepted, as if the books had been updated and the tally made right. The boards domed under my boots. A black seam opened between 2 planks, exhaling air from below that smelled like drowned matches and wet coin. The first pick hit the underside of the board by the stove, so hard the lantern went out. In the dark I felt the vibration run into my heels. A second blow, and the board split along the grain. Cold lifted through the crack like the breath of an animal. I grabbed for the door and yanked. It stuck. Behind me, metal scraped through wood. I threw my shoulder into the latch and it ripped free, spilling me into sleet and wind. The hammering cut off the instant my boots hit the muck outside, as if the shift bell had rung and all hands had stopped in the same second. False relief made me lightheaded. I ran anyway. The camp road wasn't a road anymore, just a suggestion through muskegee, reflective tape on willow wands fluttering like fish in fast water. I put my head down and moved. Sleet scoured the skin under my hood. My breath came in short, burning drafts. Once over the noise of the storm, I heard the men again. No picks this time, only their chant, a wordless rise and fall like air in a mine with the pumps gone quiet. At the edge of the shaft line, the ground had a different give, almost hollow. My headlamp caught the figure again at the periphery, tall, shoulders hunched, watching. When I turned the beam full on him, he was only weather and willow. Behind me, inside the shack I'd fled, the radio hissed a last time. Through it, my grandfather's voice rasped smaller and farther away. "Don't let them see you." Then even the static died. I don't remember the middle of the run, only that each time I stopped to orient, the wind would carry a single tap of metal on stone from somewhere beneath my feet, as if the ground itself were thin and there were rooms below with their own weather. When the tents finally loomed out of the gray stovepipes dark against a bruised sky, my legs felt like someone else's. I staggered into the vestibule of the nearest tent, soaked and shaking. Heat hit me with the sour smell of damp wool and kerosene. Matt sat up on his cot, earplugs still in one fist, hair plastered to his forehead. "Dude," he said, blinking. "What time?" He looked past me at the light bleeding around the tent seams. "You were gone all night." Kyle unzipped the inner door with sleep-swollen fingers. "We figured you found the cache and bivvied. We didn't come for you. Lightning set's been hitting ridges." I checked the wall clock above the stove. 5:41. My tongue felt thick. "The shack," I said. "Down the trail. Big one. Tools still inside." I stopped, hearing how thin it would sound. We went back after coffee and a weather check, 3 of us in a line, the storm blown out to a flat pewter sky. I led, counting steps, watching for the notch in the spruces and the drop to the old track. When we reached the spot, my stomach turned over like I'd stepped off a curb in the dark. There was no shack, no stacked pickaxes, no fallen roof furred with moss. The ground was a shallow bowl of ice, and stone smoothed clean like a tongue had licked it. The nearest mouth, where the shaft had caved, was sealed by a plate of old ice, bubbled and opaque with no bootprints under it. A gull cried once overhead, and then thought better of it. "Maybe you ducked into the gear shed up trail," Kyle said. Soft, not pressing. He looked at my hands, the way I was holding them slightly open, as if I'd been carrying something heavy and had forgotten to put it down. "Storm plays tricks." "Maybe," I said, because what else was there to say? The shack lived in me with a clarity. The daylight didn't have the smell of damp wood and iron, the lantern pinching thin when the hammering rose, the draft from below with that struck match reek. You don't misremember a board breathing under you. Back in town 2 days later, while we waited for a resupply, I tried the voicemail in the corner of a diner that smelled like coffee and fryer oil. The message list showed nothing. No missed call, no recording. I handed the phone to Matt and asked him to listen in case it was some Bluetooth quirk. He held it to his ear and shrugged. "Static," he said. "Maybe rain got in." We hiked other routes that summer. I said yes to day trips and no to anything that skirted old workings. When I couldn't avoid them, I moved fast and kept my gaze high. If a plank bridge creaked, I measured my breaths against the sound, until the urge to match the rhythm passed. On the last night before I flew home, I walked down to the river and stood where the gravel bars glowed with late sun. Mosquitoes drifted like ash over the shallows. Somewhere upriver, a generator hummed. Under everything, I heard it again. Faint at first, the measured ring of metal on stone. I told myself it was water shifting cobbles, but the pattern didn't wander. It held. Then the roll call rose once more, farther away than before, as if the shaft had receded down and back. The names slid past like lantern light turning on wet rock. At the end, as always now, came mine. Not demanded, entered, accounted for. The sound faded with the light. I stood there until my shoulders went cold and the mosquitoes found my neck. When I went to sleep in the bunkhouse, I left the radio out on the table and my phone off. I woke at 12:31 to the pressure of silence on the building, a long exhale like weather changing. From somewhere deep under the floor, the old frost line, the pipes, or the earth beyond any system, weirdly gentle, came a single tap that ran through the wood into my bones. I don't guide near mines anymore. I don't put my name on anything I can help, not on trail registers or ranger forms, not out loud when the wind is busy. And when thunder stacks over the flats and the spruce goes still, I count to 60 and keep my own breath quiet, like a man on the edge of a shaft trying not to drop a single pebble. It's not fear exactly that keeps me honest. It's courtesy. Some crews never clock out. Some shifts run long enough that time pinches thin, and whatever is working under there learns your cadence, then writes you into the book. If you hear them, don't answer. If they call the roll, and they speak your name, remember what the old bosses used to say when they posted warnings over tunnels. Keep out, men working below. March 2014. The Kuskokwim River was still locked in ice, and the sky hung low with that eerie pink light you only see late in the Alaskan season. I'd been hauling supply sleds between two villages. Nothing fancy, just food, meds, propane tanks, lashed down in blue tarps. I'd done the run so many times I could have traced it in my sleep. My dogs, 8 Alaskan Huskies, were my only company out there. Old bloodline, strong backs, steady hearts. I'd raised most of them myself, watched them grow from wiggling pups into leaders on the trail. That evening I made camp early. There was a storm building somewhere behind the trees, and the light had that smeared look, like clouds dragging their sleeves across the sky. Snow was firm underfoot, but softening by the hour. I tied the gangline around a spruce trunk, fed the dogs frozen fish blocks, and laid out their harnesses neatly by the sled. They ate with tails wagging, steam rising from their mouths like smoke from small chimneys. I pitched my tent, lit the little stove, boiled snow for tea, and checked my GPS. Battery red. Old. No bars, just the eternal loading wheel. No big deal. Out here, the dogs were your alarm system. They'd raise hell if so much as a fox sniffed at the trail. I remember thinking that as I zipped myself into my bag, that thought, the dogs will alert me. That was the last comfort I had before falling asleep. What woke me wasn't noise. It was the absence of it. I opened my eyes to stillness so deep it felt wrong. No chain clinks, no rustling, not even the sleepy shuffles or soft whines I'd grown used to. I sat up, heart already thudding, and grabbed my flashlight. The tent zipper was stiff with frost, but it gave way. I stepped out into a blue moonlight world that should have been peaceful. But the line was slack. The dogs gone. The harnesses still lay in the snow, each one unbuckled. The clips gleamed in my flashlight's beam. No signs of struggle, no chewed rope, just neatly released metal, as if they'd been gently undone. I scanned the camp. My sled still sat where I'd left it. My gear was untouched. No footprints but mine. Then I saw the trail. 8 sets of paw prints led away from the clearing, side by side. But the gate was off. No skipping, no sniffing detours, no signs of hesitation. Just a straight, precise trail, each paw print evenly spaced, as if they'd been marching. I should have stayed. Should have waited for daylight. But those dogs weren't just animals. They were family. I threw on my parka, slung my rifle, and followed. I called their names, Barker, Nico, Midge, Thor, but nothing answered. The trees swallowed my voice, dulling it like snow does to everything. About 100 yards in, my flashlight caught something odd. The paw prints ended. Just ended. No swirl of prints, no scatters. They stopped mid-stride, like the dogs had evaporated. Beside them, pressed deep into the crust, was something else. Not a boot, not a paw. It looked like a handprint, only wrong. Too long, too thin. Fingers sunk into the ice as if whoever made it had weight, pressure, intent. My throat tightened. That's when my radio, still off, hissed in my jacket pocket. The static rose, then broke into a sound I knew too well. A sharp 2-tone whistle. My recall whistle. The same one I'd used for years. I stood frozen, snow crunching faintly beneath my boots. Then the trees moved. Not from wind. There wasn't suddenly. The branches swayed like something had passed through. Big, heavy, quiet. Snow shivered off the limbs in sheets, and yet the air around me stayed still as glass. A step forward, then another. And then just beyond the next stand of spruce, my flashlight found them. All 8, standing in formation. No movement, no sound, just watching. They stood perfectly still, lined up exactly as they would have been if hitched to the sled. The only thing missing was the gangline. My first thought, my desperate hope, was that maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe I'd somehow walked in a circle. Maybe the prince had led me back. But my sled was nowhere in sight, and the trees here were older, gnarled and moss-laden. I slowly raised my flashlight, beam trembling, and swept it across their faces. Each dog stared straight ahead, unmoving, their eyes reflecting a strange pale green, like ice lit from within. Not one of them blinked. Not one so much as flicked an ear. Their breath didn't mist the air. A cold wind whispered through the clearing, though I felt no breeze. Then my phone buzzed. I flinched, nearly dropping it. The screen lit up with a single message notification. The sender ID, my own number. The message read, "Lie down." The moment I read it, all 8 dogs tilted their heads in unison, sharp, mechanical. It was too exact, too perfect. My spine locked up, my mind scrambling for logic, instinct screaming. That's when the silence broke. It didn't start with barking, it started with a sound like chains dragged over stone, low and metallic, grinding against the bones of the earth. And then, from deep below, a clink, clink, clink echoed through the snowpack, metal striking rock, rhythmic and slow, like a pickaxe carving its way up. I backed up 1 step, then 2. The dogs stepped forward. Together, their paws landed in sync, crunch, each press into the snow perfectly matched. Their legs moved stiffly, like limbs remembering how to walk. I raised my rifle, but even before I had it leveled, I realized it wouldn't matter. These weren't my dogs anymore. I didn't know what they were. Above us, the sky erupted into green. The aurora flared, vivid and sharp, lighting the clearing in a ghostly glow. In that unnatural light, I saw their fur rimmed with frost, like they'd been dipped in rime. Their harnesses weren't just unclipped, they were torn, the metal twisted as if pulled apart by brute force. One of the dogs opened its mouth, but no bark came. It sang, a low, hollow note, choral and wrong, not animal, not human, a hymn from a place that didn't belong in our world. The others joined, their tones rising, overlapping, layered harmonies that pushed against my skull like pressure building inside my own head. The flashlight blinked, then died. For a heartbeat, I stood in green-shadowed darkness, lit only by the shimmering curtains in the sky and the pale glow in their eyes. Their bodies began to shift. Not suddenly, not violently. Slowly, wrongly. Their outlines warped, legs bending at unnatural angles, necks stretching too far. Their mouths widened, splitting open farther than any jaw should go. Frost cracked and fell from their bodies in sheets, revealing skin underneath that looked like ash. I ran. I don't know how far. I don't know how long. The forest twisted, the trees closed in. But somehow, by instinct, by mercy, I made it back. The sled was there, tent untouched, stove cold. But the gangline was coiled, every harness laid open. And the dogs were gone. They found me at dawn, stumbling toward the main trail, eyes raw, gloves shredded, boots soaked through. I couldn't speak at first. My voice came out in dry clicks. We searched, all of us, for 2 days. No blood, no paw prints, no torn gear, no broken trees, just empty snow and silence. The official report blamed wolves, though none of the signs fit. I didn't argue. What would I even say? My phone still had the text from my own number when I got back to town. Lie down. When I showed it to one of the search crew, he blinked and said, "Your screen sips blank." I looked again. Gone. I don't mush anymore. I left the state 6 months later, couldn't sleep without waking up in sweat, hearing the clink of picks underground or that inhuman harmony rising just beneath the floorboards. Sometimes, God help me, I still whistle for the dogs. Sometimes I forget for just a second that they're gone, that they didn't just vanish. They changed. And they saw me. Now and then, in the dead hours, I hear the jingle of metal rings. Footsteps in snow I can see. Sometimes I hear them scratching, not at the door, but under the house. As if they stir waiting. As if they'd been waiting this whole time, still tied to something older than man or mountain, still working their way forward, step by perfect step. And someday, They'll come for me to finish the run. We has been talking about it all summer. There was this old lighthouse just outside Sitka, decaying, abandoned since the 70s, when the Coast Guard stopped staffing it. Locals said it was haunted, claimed the radio inside still clicked to life on foggy nights, whispering the names of people who hadn't lived in decades. Of course, we didn't buy any of that, but after enough beers and bravado, we made a plan. It was September 2011, a restless time of year when the water turns black early and the wind begins to howl like it remembers things. Me, Craig, and Devin, all co-workers at the fish processing plant, loaded up flashlights, sleeping bags, a cheap propane heater, and enough beer to numb whatever unease the place might give us. The boat ride out was quiet. We hit land just before dusk. The sky above the water burned the color of rust, the kind of light that makes everything look older than it is. The lighthouse stood against it, tall and wrong, its bones exposed, shutters broken, iron railing rusted through, the tower leaning just enough to make your stomach turn. Inside, the walls were wet with condensation, mold clawed at the corners, sea wind pushed through every crack. But we were laughing. We were alive with the thrill of doing something stupid. We set our gear up on the concrete floor of the main chamber and cracked open our first beers. The heater sputtered to life. The night pressed against the walls. It was sometime past midnight when Craig spotted it, the old radio console still bolted to a metal frame along the far wall. Big clunky knobs. A thick handset dangling from a cracked cord. Dust layered it like skin. None of us expected it to work. But Devin grinned and said, "Let's make a call to the dead." I told them to leave it, but of course they dared me. I'd been the one to talk the biggest game, so I walked over, brushed off the grime, and pressed the big red button. "This is Mark Jensen," I said into the mic, my voice cracking in the static. "Anybody copy?" It felt ridiculous, like talking to a tombstone. We laughed, let it go. 5 minutes later, the radio came alive. At first it was just static, long drawn out, but then the tone shifted. Through the white noise, a voice crept in. It was slow, dragging, distorted. It said, "Mark." We all went still. Not just my name, but my own voice. Like I was listening to a recording of myself, only wrong, slurred, like it was being dragged from underwater. "Okay," Craig said, trying to laugh. "Old recording, maybe?"
Of what?
I snapped. "I just said it." The voice repeated it again. "Mashark." Devin reached for the dial, but the knob wouldn't turn. The radio wouldn't shut off. We pulled at the cord. Nothing. The static kept hissing. My name kept echoing. I fumbled for my phone trying to record it, but the second I opened the camera app, the screen froze, then shut off. When it restarted, the battery read 3%, even though I'd charged it on the boat ride out. No service. Not even SOS. That sets when the temperature dropped. Not gradually. 1 minute we were sweating near the heater, and the next we could see our breath. Frost crawled across the window glass. The walls popped and cracked like the ice breaking on a frozen lake. Then Craig pointed. Through the broken shutter, something pale moved, low and quick, ducking just out of sight. No wings, no shape we recognized, just a flicker. We stared, breath misting the air. "Nah," Devin whispered. "Nah, that wasn't said a bird." Nobody laughed. Still we stayed, like idiots. The radio buzzed louder, building to a pressure that pressed against our eardrums. Then it went silent. Devin, shaky, stepped up to the mic. "This is Devin Morales," he said. We waited. 5 minutes. 10. Then it came. Dievian. Drawn out, taunting. But this time the voice didn't sound like his. It was higher, like a child mocking you. He backed away. Craig tried it next. "This is Craig Porter." The reply was slower, deeper. "Craig." Like gravel grinding on wet stone. The names repeated, over and over, out of sync, layered with other whispers, foreign words, old syllables, prayers or curses. Some of them sounded like they were being spoken backwards, some in tongues we couldn't place. That's when we noticed the voices weren't only coming from the speaker anymore. They were leaking into the room itself, into the walls, into the floor. The radio barked again, this time louder, clearer than before. It said all three of our names. In order, we stared at each other, ice coating our gear. Then came the worst part, my voice again from the speaker. "We should split up. Check the tower. Don Set, tell them." I hadn't said that, but when I looked up, both of them were staring at me with suspicion in their eyes. That thing, whatever it was trying to drive a wedge, to isolate us. Craig backed up, grabbed his bag. "I sip nem done," he muttered. "I sip nout." He stormed through the door into the howling dark. I turned to follow, but Devin grabbed my arm, eyes wide with terror. "Don Set," he whispered. "That wasn't Set him. Didn't Set you hear? That wasn't Set him." We turned toward the spiral staircase, and that's when we heard it. From above us. Heavy footsteps. Coming down. And the radio, all the while, was still whispering, "We said are already inside." We both turned, flashlights trembling in our hands, and aimed the beams toward the stairwell. The spiral staircase groaned again. That sound, that unmistakable dragging weight, wasn't footsteps. It was slower, like something was pulling itself down, limb by limb, along the rusted metal rail. The shadows on the walls twisted with the flicker of our lights, stretching into things that didn't match the structure casting them. Then we saw them. Figures. Pale. Human-shaped, but not aright. They came down the stairs, not walking, but gliding, almost twitching, as if pulled by unseen strings. Their outlines flickered like an old video feed, 1 second solid, the next transparent, and their faces. They were ours. My face. Devin Set's face. Even Craig Set's. Not approximations. Not masks. Exact. They looked at us with dead, mirrored eyes, unblinking. Their mouths moved in perfect sync with the static from the radio behind us. Open, close, chanting in rhythm, as if the radio signal had taken root in their throats. Mark, Devin, Craig. The cold deepened. I could feel the frost inside my jacket now, lacing across the lining. My boots stuck slightly to the damp floor. I couldn't tell if the heater had gone out or if it simply didn't matter anymore. Devin snapped. He screamed and hurled his flashlight up the stairs. It shattered against the wall with a pop, throwing sparks, and for a single instant, the figures flinched. The radio responded with a screech. Louder than before, a roar made of hundreds of voices, layered and warping in pitch. The names stopped. The chants stopped. And then the room went black. No hum from the heater. No whine from the radio. Just silence. A crushing, waiting silence. And then something touched my face. Not a brush, not a breeze. It was deliberate, cold fingertips tracing my cheek as if measuring. And in the dark I heard it, my voice again, whispering, "Mark, it's your turn." I panicked, reached blindly, found Devin's coat, yanked him toward the door. We crashed through it together, stumbling out into the storm. Wind howled like it was trying to push us back. The snow came sideways, thick and fast, but I ran, pulling him with me down the rocky path that led toward the shoreline. We didn't set look back. We didn't set dare. At some point, the world became noise and white. I lost hold of Devin's sleeve. I shouted his name once, twice, but the storm swallowed it. And then nothing. No light. No voice. No friend. I woke up the next morning face down in a snowdrift, half buried near the rocks. My sleeping bag had been stuffed into my gear pack. I don't remember doing it. No sign of the lighthouse behind me. Just gray sky and gray sea. And silence. Back in Sitka, the authorities wrote it off. Storm came in fast. 2 men lost to hypothermia, or the sea. Happens more than anyone admits. I didn't argue. But when I finally got my phone to turn on again, a voicemail waited, unread, time-stamped 2 hours after sunrise. No number. Just my number. I played it. It was my voice, but strained, breathless, like I said been running for miles. Don said come back. They said you're still calling. And one day you said you'll answer. I deleted the message. But sometimes, late at night when the wind presses against my windows and the radio in my truck fuzzes with sudden static, I swear I hear my name again, drawn out through the white noise, waiting. And once, only once, I thought I saw a figure standing near the tree line behind my house. It looked like me, but its mouth was open wider than it should have been, and it was listening. To the wind, to the static, to the call from that lighthouse I never should have answered. And the worst part? Some nights when I'm too tired, too alone, I whisper my name back, just to see what answers. It was early March of 2017, Alaska's season of false promises. Days stretched longer, but the cold clung tight, brittle as glass. I was about 80 miles north of Fairbanks on the Dalton Highway, part of a two-man supply run. Just me and my buddy Tyler, 2 snow machines hauling fuel drums and dry goods between weather stations. We'd done the route a dozen times. We knew every bend, every subtle slope, every place the wind liked to erase the trail. That afternoon the air had teeth. Even under 3 layers, I felt it gnawing into my ribs when we stopped for fuel. The tundra stretched in all directions, nothing but white humps and skeletal scrub willow sticking out of the drifts. The sun hung low behind a veil of clouds, bleeding a soft orange glow into the snow, but offering no heat. We were maybe an hour out from our drop point when we saw it. A mile ahead, across the flats, a wall of snow stood. Not swirling, not drifting, just standing there. It rose like a white curtain hung across the entire horizon. No edge, no curve, just flat, straight snow, unmoving, breathing nothing. Tyler keyed his helmet mic. "You seeing this?" "Yeah," I said slowly. "That set's not normal." "Storm front," he offered, though even in his voice I could hear doubt. "Storms move," I said. "They don't set wait." We stopped, engines idling low. The wind, which had tugged at our jackets all day, suddenly died. The silence was strange, not peaceful, but hollow, like the land had stopped listening. I pulled out my GPS. The arrow spun in place, refusing to lock. I tapped the screen. Still nothing. Tyler muttered, "What the hell?" then showed me his unit. It thought we were somewhere in the Bering Sea. Our phones buzzed. We looked down at the same time. Both screens lit with phantom notifications, blank messages, gibberish strings of letters, timestamps from hours in the future. We tried to laugh it off, but it didn't land. Something in the air felt wrong, heavier, like the kind of silence that watches you. And still the wall waited, unmoving. Eventually curiosity won out. Tyler shrugged, keyed his throttle, and surged ahead. I hesitated, something primal in my gut screaming no. As we approached, the storm didn't thin. It didn't ripple. It grew, stretching taller until it seemed to blot out the sky. We hit it just before 9 p.m. I remember because I glanced at my watch the second Tyler disappeared. One moment his taillight was bobbing a few yards ahead of me, then it was gone. No crash, no spin out, just gone. Swallowed. Like he'd driven off a cliff made of fog and snow. I slammed the brakes, heart hammering, sled skidding sideways on the hardpack. The front of my machine came to rest mere feet from the wall. And it wasn't that swirling snow anymore. It was solid. Like looking at the side of a glacier. White, seamless, silent. "Tyler," I shouted into my helmet mic. "Do you copy?" Static. Then after maybe 10-15 seconds, a crackling voice low and warped. "Cold, so cold. Don't tat." Then silence. I stared at the snow. Every instinct in my body screaming to run, but I couldn't leave him. I reached for the throttle and eased forward. The front of the sled touched the wall. It didn't set resist. It didn't set crunch. It swallowed me. The world blinked, and everything changed. Inside the wall it was quiet, but not the kind of quiet you want. The air was heavy, and around me the snow didn't fall. It floated. Suspended flakes hung midair, unmoving. Each one glowed faintly green, catching the aurora bleeding through the walls of ice. I twisted to look behind me. No opening. No trail, only more glowing snow and seamless white. My GPS died, just black screen and a spider web of static lines. Then the radio clicked again. Tyler Sett's voice, "This way, follow." Ahead a trail had formed, not a full path, just twin tracks in the snow, clean and parallel, stretching deeper into the glowing tunnel. Relief hit me hard, but when I slid off the sled and knelt to check the tracks, my stomach dropped. They weren't set tire treads. They were grooves. Claw-shaped, long, deep, as if something massive had dragged itself forward, carving into the snow in perfect symmetry. And beneath the static of the radio, another sound had begun, distant, layered. Whispers, many voices, whispering in a language I didn't set know. I stayed crouched beside the grooves, listening. The voices weren't random. They pulsed like breath, rising, falling, as if something beyond the ice was speaking through layers of snow. The words weren't English, but they had weight, a rhythm, a call. I shouted Tyler Sepp's name. The echo that returned wasn't mine. It came half a second later, lower pitched, distorted, like someone else repeating what I just said. Poorly. The hairs rose on the back of my neck. I stood trembling and pulled out my phone. No signal, no bars, no GPS. But a new voicemail notification blinked on the cracked screen. Sender. Me. My thumb hovered over the play button. Then I tapped it. My voice, rasping, panicked, spilled through the speaker. You already went too far. You never came back. I dropped the phone. That's when the whispering grew louder. The tunnel pulsed with it, now rising like a chorus. The snow walls shimmered faintly, and I realized they weren't just walls. They were windows. Shapes began to emerge inside the snow, distorted human outlines trapped within the ice. Men, hunched and gaunt, frozen mid-motion. Some were crouched like they were hiding. Others stood upright, arms outstretched, fingers clawing at the other side of the frost. Their faces were blurred, smudged like wet ink, but one detail was terrifyingly clear. They were all wearing helmets. Riders, snowmaginers, just like us. One had Tyler Sepp's red jacket. Another had my backpack. The light dimmed, my headlamp flickered, then went out completely. Now the only illumination came from the greenish glow of the frozen storm and the shapes pressing closer behind the walls. Then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of picks striking stone. Clink, clink, clink. Steady, purposeful, rhythmic. The ground beneath me thrummed with each strike. I backed away instinctively, but my boot hit something soft. I turned and screamed. It was Tyler. Or at least, something wearing his face. But it wasn't right. His features were frozen mid-expression, his jaw unhinged wider than it should have been. His limbs twitched, moved, but didn't flex, like something inside was pushing them, manipulating him from beneath the skin. Follow, it said in a chorus of voices. Not his. A dozen whispers packed into one mouth. Then it turned and glided forward, deeper into the tunnel. My legs finally listened to my fear. I ran. I didn't know where the exit was. I didn't know if there was one, but I ran through the frozen tunnel, past the claw tracks, past the flickering figures in the ice. Behind me I heard the sound of pursuit, not footsteps but scraping, gliding, like something enormous, moving just below the surface. I don't remember reaching the edge. I don't remember breaking through. All I know is that 1 second I was surrounded by cold voices and flickering green light, and the next I was lying face down on the open tundra, snow falling gently around me. My snow machine sat idling nearby, half covered in frost. No sign of Tyler, no storm wall, no tunnel. Just white, endless white. They found me 2 days later, half frozen but alive. I told them what happened. The tunnel, the storm that didn't move. The voices, they chalked it up to exposure, hallucinations, grief. They never found Tyler. His snow machine never turned up. No crash site, no debris, no tracks. Just me, just silence. Back in Fairbanks, I replaced my phone, but sometimes late at night it buzzes again. One new voicemail. Always from my number. Always the same message. My voice, barely a whisper. You never came back. And worse, sometimes beneath the static, I can hear picks, still striking, still digging, like they stir making room.